We return here as we dive into Crossover Thursday, this time with Locked On Steelers, next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, and here today on this Thursday, we have a Crossover Thursday. 3 segments full with Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers as Baltimore is set to go to Pittsburgh to Heinz Field and take on those 5-1 Steelers. Baltimore obviously at 8-3 at the top of the AFC North and the top of the entire AFC Conference. So let's dive into Crossover Thursday here with Locked On Steelers. Before we do that, though, be sure to follow the show anywhere you get your podcasts in audio form. So Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts. We are free and available Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern Time is when our content comes out. Also, be sure if you're following along with us on YouTube to hit the subscribe button, like the video. It does help out with the YouTube algorithm. I appreciate everybody who is making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day, and I appreciate everybody who is following along, listening, subscribing, and everything in between. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter at ChaosStriker34 and the Locked On Ravens account for show updates at Locked On Ravens. So with all that being said, let's dive into Crossover Thursday here with Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers.
It is Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network, and it's Steelers Ravens week. That means you've got Chris Carter, myself from Locked On Steelers, Kevin Ostreicher from the Locked On Ravens podcast. Kevin, it's so great to do this show with you, my friend. How have you been?
I've been good, Chris. It's been a while. The Ravens and Steelers having 2 matchups in this back half of the year, but it'll be nice to have this rivalry finally happen this season. It is week 13. The teams are going through their share of injury concerns and have a bit different records right now, but these games are always so good, Chris. I'm excited for this.
They always are. Both teams respect each other. It's going to be very interesting. What's always interesting is you guys should check out Stat Hero. It's the first of its kind daily fantasy sports platform where it's you versus the house and head-to-head fantasy matchups where it's winner take all. Sign up for free right now at stathero.com/lockedon and use promo code LOCKEDON. That's LOCKEDON, all capital letters, all one words, for a 100% deposit match. We'll get more on that later. But Kevin, let's dive right into it. The Ravens have been very up and down at times this year. There's games that look really impressive. They have really great walk-off wins. And then there's times they lose to the Dolphins. And I'm like, what is this? What's going on here? Where are the Ravens right now as far as, a stabilizing standpoint? Because to me, it's always been this. I have the world of respect for Lamar Jackson, who he is as a quarterback. But is it really is he the guy that's just making this whole thing go? Or are there lots of different guys who have really chipped in this year?
Yeah, well, Lamar Jackson, Chris, is the guy who really makes this offense turn, who makes this team go. But there are guys who have been stepping up in a big way. It can't just be Lamar Jackson every week or else that wouldn't really work. So Jackson has taken a step as a passer this season. He's kind of had to because with all the injuries Baltimore's gone through in the run game, they don't have J.K. Dobbins this year. They don't have Gus Edwards. Both players were lost before the season. So they've been working with, Latavius Murray, Devonta Freeman, people call him now Ravens legend Le'Veon Bell, although he's no longer on the team. It just didn't work on the field. This isn't 2016 anymore for these guys, so they've lost a step or two. Mm-hmm. But because of that, the run game, it's no longer the burst of 15, 20-yard plays. It's now they'll get you 3 yards when you can get 3 yards or when you need 3 yards, but there's not much more to it. So the pass game has had to take that step up. Marquis Brown's played very well this season. Mark Andrews is still a very good security blanket. You have guys like Rashad Bateman stepping in as a rookie, playing really well through his first few games here. And even Sammy Watkins, a nice veteran guy. But even the offense has sputtered a bit over these last 3 weeks for Baltimore. Just 1 touchdown in each of their last 3 games. It's the defense, this Baltimore defense. And, when you look at the Ravens' history over their franchise, it's been, all right, the Ray Lewis, the Ed Reed, the Terrell. So, the Ravens' defense is the unit. But it's been a bit of an issue this year. The pass defense has not been amazing. They've improved, but it's been up and down. The big plays have been a problem. But over the last 3 weeks, the Ravens' defense is allowing not a ton of points, 4 total touchdowns over the last 3 weeks combined. That's pretty good. And usually it wins you football games, although they are 2-1. You mentioned the loss of the Dolphins. Lamar Jackson has had to put a lot on his shoulders. His turnovers are a bit up this year because without a run game, it's made this offense a bit more one-dimensional than I think they would like to after having really good historical rushing offenses. So I've been impressed with Jackson. I've been impressed with this team. They're 8-3, despite, in my opinion, in terms of actual quantity and talent, they're the most injured team in the league. I know Tennessee has a few more guys, but in terms of talent lost, Baltimore has them by a mile. So, overall 8-3, the top of the AFC through 12 weeks. I think that's probably the best case scenario people could have imagined in Baltimore before the year when they had just a gluttony of injuries.
No, yeah, definitely. I mean, when you saw all the running backs go down, Marcus Peters go down, this guy, that guy. I mean, a lot of people were saying, bye bye Baltimore, and I was like, I don't know, man. Lamar Jackson's still there, and I mean, you saw it when he first came in 2018. The team was falling apart. There was rumors that John Harbaugh was going to be out soon, and all of a sudden you throw Lamar Jackson instead of Joe Flacco, and they become a playoff team. They win the division. Like that's how much he brings to the organization. And I was like, you can't undervalue that when you're talking about what the Ravens do really well. So that's one aspect I think is really impressive. But I wanted to ask you, because Mike Tomlin really highlighted the ability for Marquis Brown to get Marquis Brown to get open. I wanted to get your perspective on where has he grown as a receiver. He was always fast. He's always he's the big play guy. But what are the things that he's kind of worked on to be better? And what are things where you're still like, hey, we need to see this more out of you to make you the really number one receiver on this team?
Yeah, so Marquise Brown's a bit of an interesting situation, especially in Baltimore. A lot of people saw him come out of Oklahoma, Chris, and were just like, is he a gadget player? He's super small, not very strong. He has the speed, but is he just a deep threat? He came in and had a really good rookie year and followed that up with a pretty good second year as well. He was expected to take a huge leap this year. And I mean, he's done it. He's improved his route running. He looks a lot more crisp. He looks a lot more fluid in his routes. He's getting open. He's one of Lamar Jackson's favorite targets. He's very, very impressive. And considering the growth that we've seen every single year, it's putting a lot of confidence in with people just to see, what can he be when he hits his peak. I think a lot of people are excited about that, but some areas he has to improve in. Drops have been a bit of an issue for him over the course of his career. He hasn't really been able to shake that. He's very up and down with it. Like, for example, against the Detroit Lions in week 3, pretty much dropped 3 touchdown passes in a very short amount of time. And, we all know how that game ended. Justin Tucker with that NFL record 66-yard field goal, but they wouldn't have even been in that situation. And Marquise Brown just catches 1 or 2 of those passes. So you have to kind of take the good with the bad, especially with young players. Marquise Brown is still so young, still learning, and still trying to find his role in this offense. They've established for him, though, that, he can play all over the field. A lot of these Ravens receivers can. That's a really big part of his game. But Brown's been impressive to me. Right now, he is the number 1 receiver on this team. He has a couple of other guys who can really complement him well, such as Mark Andrews and Bateman and some of those other guys. But I think Brown, even though the drops have been a bit of an issue, he's still playing great football this year.
Now, I want to flip to the defense before we send it to our first break, of course. You talked about that defense. They've stepped up. Calais Campbell's still there. Brandon Williams has always just been that annoying nose tackle that just can just get in people's way and take up 2 blockers. Tyus Bowser, I've seen step up. You had Owe, who stepped up for a big play. Then you still got, Justin Houston is playing really well. But I wanted to talk about that secondary. What's been going on with the secondary? You still got Marlon Humphrey, but of course, with all the injuries that have come, they have not been able to be the same group. Where have you seen? Could you help Steeler Nation understand who is are the guys that are making up most of the snaps in the secondary, and how have you graded them out so far?
Yeah, definitely. It's been a unit that struggled. I mentioned their pass defense for a while was in the bottom 5 in a lot of these categories. They have stepped it up in recent weeks. They played Miami and Chicago and Cleveland, so not like world breaker offenses, but still, you got to play who's in front of you. Marlon Humphrey, you talked about, is the guy. He still is having a great year, has been caught looking in the backfield a couple times, has gotten burned a few times, a couple holding calls, but he still is a top 5 corner in the league, and that, you're pretty squared away with him. But Marcus Peters, we talked about, done for the year. They lost to Sean Elliott, their starting safety, in week 9 to a torn pectoral muscle and a torn bicep, and he played through it for a little bit. So, he's a tough guy, but they've had to replace him with a rookie 3rd rounder in Brandon Stevens, who played running back in high school in his first 2 years of college, converted to cornerback for his final 2 years and transferred, and now is converting over to more of a safety. So he's still learning the position. He's played decently well, but has definitely struggled over these last couple of weeks. You also have Anthony Averitt, who is their number 2 corner at this point. He has stepped up, and outside of Indianapolis, where he had by far his worst game of the year, he's played decently well. He's been banged up also, so that could maybe be contributing to a bit of just okay play over the past couple of weeks. Tavon Young's one of the better slot corners in the NFL. He, after having 3 season-ending injuries in 5 years, has played well this year. And he's arguably the team's best tackler, honestly, after how many issues they had earlier in the season with it. And then you have guys like Chris Westry, who's a 6'4" corner, runs sub 4.4. So you have the athletic traits there, but he's still very, very raw and very young. Other than that, you see every week the Ravens are signing defensive backs to their practice squad. Jimmy Smith has been in and out this year, hasn't really played a ton over the past couple of weeks, especially because he's been injured. He did return to practice in a limited fashion on Wednesday, so that's a positive. But yeah, the secondary is hurting. I think, they're feeling the loss of Marcus Peters. He just does so much for a defense. You trust him. He'll give up a big player too, but he has the ability to change a football game, to really get in the quarterback's head. And so that's where I think Baltimore is really missing. And when he comes back, if he comes back, there are rumors of him being a salary cap casualty in the offseason. That's a big get for them. But so far they've had to work with what they've had to work with. And it's been a very, very mixed bag.
It's certainly going to be interesting to see how they continue to play this season. The defense for the Ravens has come up big for them in more than a few games this year. But we're going to take a quick break. We come back. Kevin asks me questions on the Steelers. First, I got to tell you guys about Stat Hero. No one plays daily fantasy sports to lose. Winning feels so much better. But traditional fantasy sports are a long-term losing proposition because you never know who or what you're going up against. Stat Hero is the first of its kind daily fantasy sports platform where it's you versus the house in head-to-head fantasy matchups, and it's winner take all. And here's the crazy part. Stat Hero will even show you their lineups before you play, and you handpick the team you want to face one-on-one. This is a never-before-seen innovation of a fantasy sports and sports betting hybrid as Stat Hero players clocking odds that are over 4 times better. Why? Because you don't have to compete against thousands of experts or unknowns. Stat Hero puts you in control of your fate. With Stat Hero, you are in control of the stakes. You decide how much you're going to play for, and Stat Hero has no choice but to take it because they're daring you to beat them. Stat Hero is head-to-head and is what daily fantasy should be one-on-one. Sign up for free right now at stathero.com/lockedon. That's stathero.com/lockedon. Use promo code LOCKEDON. That's LOCKEDON, all capital letters, all one word, and you'll receive a 100% deposit match on your first deposit. Again, that's stathero.com/lockedon for promo code Locked On to receive your 100% match on your first deposit. stathero.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply.
We are back here. Our second segment of this crossover Thursday rivalry week. Kevin Oestreicher, Locked On Ravens. Chris Carter, Locked On Steelers. And Chris asked me questions about the Ravens in the first segment. I'm going to put him on the hot seat here, ask him some questions about the Steelers. And I mean, Chris, I don't think we could start anywhere else but the quarterback situation in Pittsburgh with Ben Roethlisberger and how he's performed this year, what he's doing for this football team, and just how far he can take this team overall. Now, Pittsburgh is sitting at 5-5-1, and you have, I think, a team that is kind of wondering what their next steps are with the quarterback position. Obviously, it feels like this has been Roethlisberger's last year, but how would you assess his play so far in 2021, and how far do you think he can take this team if he can take them anywhere?
Well, the thing is that I really had Ben Roethlisberger through they had about 5 weeks where they didn't lose a game because technically they tied with the Lions, but they had at one point I think a 4-game win streak, and you saw just he was doing exactly what they were asking to do. Don't throw the interception in the touch when you get into the red zone. Throw it to the Pat Freiermuth, throw it to Deontay Johnson, get it to a playmaker, and let them finish the drive. And that's what he had been doing. He went several weeks without an interception. That was broke against the Bengals just last week. So that's the biggest factor. But the problem that I see with Ben Roethlisberger is when the Steelers need the offense to take control of a game, it is very hard for him to do so. It's not the same days where he would just sling the ball 50 yards downfield. He can still hit the occasional deep ball. He can still hit Chase Claypool on a deep pattern. He had a couple of those last week. He can still hit a guy on a post pattern. But you look at what he's been able to do, and you're sitting there. It's like, man, he's not the elite master reader of defenses. He doesn't understand everything that's going on all the time. Except the difference is now he doesn't have the strength and the mobility to just shake guys off, buy more time, and then kind of play sandbox football, if you will. So that's where he's at right now. He's still focused, like he's still in it, and he's still kind of playing the game. He's still really trying, but it's just you see his limitations. And the truth is they really need the run game to return soon. It kind of took a break last week against the Bengals, but Najee Harris has been his balancing point. When he gets going, he can play off him, hit some play action passes, and that's been Ben Roethlisberger's best times.
Yeah, and so with, sometimes a struggling passing offense, you would hope the run game would be able to step it up and maybe alleviate some of that. Pittsburgh is 26th in net yards per attempt through the air, but on the ground, they're actually worse. They're 29th. And you have a guy like Najee Harris who's averaging 3.6 yards per carry. Chris, has this running game been up to your expectations this year? And how would you assess, both the running back situation, but also the offensive line and how they've blocked this year?
Well, Najee Harris himself is doing a phenomenal job. He's making guys miss. I think he has the 5th most forced missed tackles in the NFL, but most of those are happening right at the line of scrimmage. The Steelers knew they were going through a rebuilding project with the offensive line. They were just trying to get these guys to play physical. But what you've seen is a problem from having so many rookies on the line. Kendrick Green playing center when he wasn't used to playing center. He still isn't used to playing center because he was a guard at Illinois. He's really good at going, pulling, and hitting in space, and that's what they really love about him because he can be really physical. But he's still not used to snapping the ball and quickly getting his hands back up to keep defensive tackles off of him from establishing leverage. Dan Moore Jr., an offensive tackle, has held his own as a fourth round rookie draft pick out of Texas A&M. Up against Myles Garrett. Garrett was giving him the business, but he only allowed Garrett to get 1 sack in that game. It's like when you consider that kind of a matchup, you'll take that. But the Steelers offensive line also dealing with some injuries. Kevin Dotson, who was their best lineman going into the middle part of the season, he had like an ankle injury. He's in a boot. He's been on injured reserve for the past couple weeks. Then his backup J.C. Hassenhauer has an injury. He's not going to be able to play in this game most likely. And now his backup Joel Haig, and he's on the COVID list. So the Steelers have just had a wave of unfortunate situations with their offensive line, and that's already a group that's been struggling. So a lot of it is just this group needs to be cohesive. And I wrote about this for DKPittsburghSports.com. When you look at the tape, it's not that they're always getting blown off the ball. It's just that oftentimes there's just that one person who didn't communicate or didn't understand, hey, I'm supposed to get to the second level here, or hey, I'm supposed to help wall off this guy, and that'll create the crease that Najee Harris needs to go. But when Najee gets going, he's really tough. He's a phenomenal weapon. It's just that they still need to rebuild this offensive line. They started the process this year. I think they'll make a lot more of an all overhaul next year when they get more draft picks, and they'll also have a lot more free agency space.
Yeah, the cap space will be huge, especially I think just to rebuild not just the offensive line, because that's the big part of it. I think it does all start up front for an offense because regardless of how good you are as a quarterback, how good you are as a running back, if there's a defender in the backfield within 1 second, 2 seconds, even if you are a guy like Lamar Jackson, sometimes there's just not a lot you can do with that. But Chris, I want to flip back over to the passing offense just briefly. Talk a bit about the weapons that Ben Roethlisberger is throwing to. Obviously, no Juju Smith-Schuster for the remainder of this year. He's been out for a while now. You have Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson, but who are some of those other contributors that Ravens fans might not be aware about? There's a rookie tight end contributing also. That's a big part of this offense too.
Listen, Steelers fans are so ready for Pat Freiermuth to be the second coming of Heath Miller. And honestly, he's a different kind of guy because Heath Miller was a blocker first and then a really good catching tight end. Pat Freiermuth is a really, really good receiving tight end. He's made multiple one-handed grabs. While he's been in the end zone. He's fast once he gets the ball in his hands. He looks to make plays. And he's had some up and downs. He fumbled in overtime against the Lions, and the fumble that ultimately, locked them into that tie. But when Ben Roethlisberger's thrown in the ball, he's caught it. He leads the team with 6 touchdown receptions, and a lot of those are red zone, just like, hey, young guy, go up and get that. And he's like, okay, and he wins those jump balls. So he's been a target that they really love to use. Deontay Johnson continues to emerge as a true receiving threat with great route running. He's shored up his hands. Last year, he led the NFL in drops. This year, I think he has 1 official drop on the season. And a lot of that is because all through training camp, all through practices, he's always the first one out now. now. And every time he's out there, he's just catching tennis balls over his shoulder and catching this way, this one that way, and that one the other way. And that's allowed him to be a much better receiver this year. So really, it's been a mix of Johnson, Claypool, Harris, and Freiermuth. They've worked in Ray McCloud occasionally. He's back off a COVID list, so you'll see him a little bit a little bit. He's more of a quickster speed guy who's really been worked in. James Washington hasn't really been a feature of this offense, but for what it is right now, the Steelers are basically relying on those four guys as Ben's primary targets to make big plays.
Yeah, so there is big play opportunity. We know Deontay Johnson can make multiple big plays. He's someone who can shake open, make some things happen, and Claypool can be a deep threat for them, obviously. But, other than that, you have Freiermuth, who I think, is turning into something in Pittsburgh. So hopefully, we'll see what ends up happening there. But Chris, moving on to the defense, this Pittsburgh defense hasn't been the same as we've seen in recent seasons this year. It's been a struggle sometimes on both, both passing and rushing defense for them. We know what TJ Watt is. He might not, we don't know yet exactly, it seems like, but
we don't know either.
Yeah, if he does play, obviously that's a big advantage for Steelers. If he doesn't play, obviously the Ravens benefit in that. But Cam Hayward, you can argue, is playing the best football of his career, and he's 32 years old at this point. You have Alex Highsmith, who was filled in for Bud Dupree, but there's been the acquisition of Joe Schobert, which has been a thing. You have Devin Bush, who struggled recently, Robert Spillane, who obviously is not going to be available, seems like. So for this Pittsburgh Steelers defense, Chris, how would you assess it so far through 12 weeks? And are you a bit disappointed by how it's looked?
I think the biggest thing is that they're holding on, with Scotch tape. With a lot of these injuries, as banged up as the Ravens are, the Steelers are down like 4 defensive linemen, and that was their core. Like, as much as TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith off the edges are exciting, and TJ Watt's the best player on the team, it gets kind of marred when Cam Hayward's the only guy in the middle. There's no Stephon Tuitt. There's no Tyson Alualu. They really liked Carlos Davis coming into the season as the guy off the bench to spell them. And so now you're having to deal with a situation where Chris Wormley's your starting defensive tackle. And as you know, that's probably not the best situation for your defense, every play. But that's been the issue, is that the strength of this team was going to be relying on that front four to just dominate games, and then to keep Devin Bush and Joe Schobert clean. And Schobert's actually come in and done a decent job. He's hung in there. He's made the heady plays. He's been the good veteran that's kind of stabilized things. Just Devin Bush is just kind of in a fog right now. When you look at the way that he plays, last year before he was injured, in the year in his rookie season before that, he was flying all over the field. He was going sideline to sideline. He was blowing up plays, making plays on the ball, all these things. This year, he's doing none of that. It looks like he doesn't trust his knee yet after his ACL surgery. He's still trying to recover from that. So he hasn't played well. Some people call him a bust. I'm going to pump those brakes until I see him actually see if he recovers, because there's other guys out there with busted ACLs that aren't recovering just as fast, like Bud Dupree, former Steeler, who's now with the Titans and back on injured reserve for them. So yeah, I'm not going to doom him just yet, but the defense is missing those role player presences that always locks things down on the Steelers defense. Cause you have, of course you have your stars like Cam Hayward and TJ Watt, and Cam Hayward is having a phenomenal season. Even though he has 5.5 sacks in the year, he's so hard to stop, and he's bringing it every play, and he brings energy and leadership to the Steelers defense. But when you look at, how other guys are filling in, I mean, Isaiah Loudermilk, a 5th-round rookie out of Wisconsin, Henry Mondo, an undrafted guy that they've been kind of hanging around on because of his ability to play special teams. They went and got Taco Charlton as a backup edge guy. They have their backup free safety for Minka Fitzpatrick is Trey Norwood, who's played well for a backup 7th-round, pick of a safety, but it's all adding up, and you're seeing guys not finishing plays on tackles, not communicating properly. And that's where I think the biggest problem for the Steelers is right now, is they have been out of sync. And Mike Tomlin had a really big padded practice on Wednesday. They normally don't do that as much later in the season because he only gets so many of those. But he's emphasized, we got to get back to being physical, because we haven't been that in the past couple weeks.
Yeah, and it's for any team really, and especially in Baltimore as well, where regardless of how many talented players you have on the team, the ones that you're missing, if you're missing a ton of talent, it just lowers the ceiling of what your team can do. And that doesn't mean you can't win football games, doesn't mean you can't go far.
Mhm.
But for the Steelers with their defensive line, for the Ravens with their secondary, you can talk about, you've been disappointed with this, disappointed with that. But at the same time, they have to work with what they're working with. And sometimes you just don't have the talent to keep up with it. So it's not like, oh, these players are playing poorly or this, that, and the other. It's just
Right.
they don't have some of their talent this year. And that is what it is. But we'll head into our final break. When we get back, we'll be talking about some matchups to watch for this Ravens and Steelers matchup. So stay tuned for that, and we'll be right back. BetOnline is you covered all season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football season continues to march to the playoffs. BetOnline remains the number one spot for all the sports action this season. Head to our new updated desktop or mobile website 2 signups a day and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code LOCKEDON to receive your bonus. From basketball, football, NHL, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Back here on the Crossover Thursday episode on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's Chris Carter. It's Kevin Ostreicher. We're here, Steelers Ravens, breaking it down. Now, one thing I love to do with crossover hosts in these episodes is we like to talk about matchups. We've both talked about our own teams and what teams we cover, but we want to get into matchups and things that we think are going to set tones for how this game is going to go. And I'm going to lead off here, Kevin, with an important matchup that I think favors the Ravens in this situation, just based off the way the Steelers have played. But gap integrity has been a problem with the Steelers over the past couple of weeks. You have Isaiah Loudermilk coming back off an injury. He's a 5th-round rookie that they've liked, but he's still having to learn how to play defensive line. And between with TJ Watt maybe missing this game, there's going to be a lot of chances for Lamar Jackson to be going up against backup guys up front in positions where the Steelers have been very stout against him in the past, not letting him break loose and break open games. To me, that's the matchup that the Steelers are in the most trouble with. If they're not able to just pinch down and say, hey, we're going to keep, Lamar Jackson bottled up in the pocket, and if he tries to slip out, we'll at least be able to trip him. If they're not able to do that in this game, this is going to be over before it started. And I think that's going to be the nightmare situation for the Steelers. It's a big challenge to backups like Chris Wormley, backups like Isaiah Buggs, backups like Henry Mondo. There's going to be all sorts of guys that are going to be called upon up front to step up and make plays. And that's also going to include Devin Bush and Joe Schobert coming up to clean up after those guys make those plays. So that's my first matchup that I think favors the Ravens. The one thing that I think does favor the Steelers is if they can get their playmakers in space, that's where they can do the most damage. Find ways to hit Chase Claypool, not deep down the sideline, but over the middle. Let him run some slants, let him run some ins, let him catch the ball in space and let him work. That way you take the pressure off Ben Roethlisberger. And then the same thing goes for Deontay Johnson and especially Najee Harris and Pat Freiermuth. Use your playmakers. They're very good weapons. Ben Roethlisberger just has to target the middle of the field. The problem is, Kevin, he hasn't done that all season. And the 1 week he did was the Chargers game, and he threw 3 touchdowns. So you'd think he'd go back to that, but no, he refuses to. So those are my matchup keys there. Kevin, what are 2 matchups that you're looking for that could favor one side or the other?
Yeah, well, Chris, the Steelers might get Chase Claypool on the sideline because the Ravens have had problems with their big plays this season. And even though the defense has played well over these last 3 weeks, the big plays have not gone away. They've still given up big plays. There have been miscommunications, whether it comes on screens or whether it comes through a bunch of other things as well. Looking at this team and just what they are doing on defense, there's been improvement, but they're giving up chunk plays of like 60 yards. You see 49 yards, you see 23 yards. So that's one area where, especially with the Steelers having weapons that can do that, like Chase Claypool, like Deontay Johnson, if you throw Pat Freiermuth in there, you can. The Ravens, they have to get better at that, but they just haven't over the course of this season. So that's one area where, look, if they can cut down on the big plays and take that out of their vocabulary, then this could be a good game for them. But if they let a guy slip past their defense, if there's a miscommunication and guys don't get, in their zones or whatever they're doing, that could result in a big play touchdown, a big game that could really shift momentum to Pittsburgh. And that's something the Ravens just don't want. One area where I think it does favor the Ravens, I do think shutting down the run game is one area where Baltimore's been very good this season. And with Pittsburgh not having the best run game this year, with the offensive line struggling a little bit, with potentially Calais Campbell coming back, this Ravens defense could potentially make Pittsburgh's offense even one more dimensional than I think they have been this season. And that's big for any game plan on defense every week, week in, week out. One of the goals is to make an offense one dimensional so that you can kind of resort more resources back to the area that's killing you. So if the Ravens can take the run game out of the equation completely and say, you know what, we're stopping it, we're good. The Steelers have to throw the football a bit more. That can be a big part of it as well. So I think stopping the run game is huge for the Ravens to start off the game. And that'll be two matchups for me that I think really favor both sides.
That's going to be really interesting. There's your matchup talk for this game. We both each have an episode coming out Friday to get you ready one last time for Steelers Ravens. It's always a great week when the Steelers and Ravens play each other in the AFC North. Kevin, it's always awesome doing this show with you, my friend. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. I am on Twitter, CashTrekker34. The Locked On Ravens account is at Locked On Ravens, and you can also find my work over at Ravens Wire. I'm the managing editor over there. But this was a blast, Chris. We'll see each other soon, though. Week 18, the first ever Week 18. We'll see the Steelers coming to M&T Bank Stadium for that final game of the year.
Yeah, I'm excited, man. I'm very excited for how these teams are going to be playing each other relatively soon. You guys do that with the Browns too, so that's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. But Kevin, thanks for doing the show with me as always on our crossovers. I'm Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can follow this show just like you follow Kevin's show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and of course YouTube. If you watch this video on the Locked On Ravens channel or the Locked On Steelers channel, give it a like, give it a subscribe. It really helps all of us out. And hey, Steelers fans, I know that you guys typically hate the Ravens, but Kevin, as you see, is a great host and awesome person. Give him a 5-star review on Apple. Help him out. Ravens fans, and I appreciate if you do the same for me, because it's all love here in the AFC North until game day when everyone's yelling at each other on Twitter. But from Chris and Kevin, we hope you have a great Thursday. We'll both be back in your screens and in your ears on Friday.